So we're well into July now, so I thought I might reflect, ponder, look back, if you will, on my 10 favorite reads so far in 2022. Hi guys, welcome back, bienvenue, and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. And today, we're going to give all the warm fuzzies, happy, loved it, living in the trauma, all of my favorite books that I've read so far in this current year. So this is going to cover everything that I've read from January through June of 2022. These are my 10 favorite reads. I will do them in order from a few honorable mentions and then a countdown from my least fave to my fave. For any of these books, I'm going to try to keep the synopses and stuff relatively brief because I've obviously talked about them all in wrap-ups or individual reviews, and any pertinent wrap-ups or reviews for each book I will link in the description down below. So if you want more nuanced thoughts or takes or any of that when these books were a little bit fresher in the noggin, then go ahead and check out those links down below. But without any further ado, let's get into some honorable mentions. So my first honorable mention goes to Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. This is book 1 in the Dark Shores. It's going to be a quintet. Currently is the plan, the vibes, the intentions in the universe. This is a self-pub book by the one, the only Elliot Brooks, who is a fellow booktuber, who is also a violinist, also an artist. Like, leave some talent for the rest of us. But this book is a lot of fun. So if you are somebody who likes Final Fantasy type monsters mixed in with your kind of political fantasy, look no further. And since it is a self-pub book, there are lots of goodies included in here. So there is like a map that Elle designed herself. And then there are also different art pieces throughout that either Elle did herself or she hired like a creature artist to do the art of her monsters that she calls her fiends. All of the character art, like this, it's all done by Elle. So not only does she write a book, she did art for the, like, so good. Very fast paced, very fun. I do have a whole dedicated video review to this book if you want more thoughts and feelings on this book in particular. So look there if you want more deets, but this book is great. Then my next honorable mention goes to The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. This is also another debut fantasy novel, first book in I don't know how many books. I think it's going to be maybe a trilogy. Yeah, the Sandsea trilogy. So this is it's a retelling of 1001 Nights, which means very little to most of us because I don't know about you, but I have never read those actual legends, tales, whatever they are, but they are very like Arabic folk tales. And so this book in particular, I kind of like to describe as almost it's like gender bent Aladdin. You have your kind of less aware of the world prince, and then you have the main female protagonist. Her name is Luli. She is the midnight thief, and she is kind of precipitating some of the events. She is sent on this quest to find this magical lamp that can grant its owner kind of whatever they want. And so this story focuses a lot, it feels almost like somebody telling you a story around a campfire while the desert wind is blowing in the back, if you know what I mean. And there are different parts inside of this novel itself where there are like actual stories being told by one of the characters. And so you can always tell those because they're given these like cool like cutouts almost where they look like these, like this old paper. And so again, I have a whole spoiler-free review of this book, so if you want more deets, look there. And if you're wondering, this is the Fairy Loot Special Edition, so it has the pretty purple and the purple sprayed edges, and then it has like some cool character art on the end papers. So this book is so good. If you're just looking for like a fun adventure with a bunch of gin, you're welcome. Then my last honorable mention goes to Heir of Amber and Fire. Again, another debut. This is another self-published book by Rachanee Lumayno, a fellow Southern Californian. And this is, it's the start of a series of standalone novels all set in the same world where there are some like crossovers. Oh, one second. The needy one wanted to come say hello. So we were talking about Heir of Amber and Fire. So that is a debut novel, first book in a series of standalone novels in this world, where you do see crossovers between different characters. So there are, like, in the second book, Heir of Memory and Shadow, there are characters mentioned from the first book, but it's not, they can very much be read alone if there's one in particular that sounds good to you. So my favorite of those so far has been this Heir of Amber and Fire. It's very much princess who can do magic, goes out to save her own kingdom. There are shape-shifting dragons, all of it. And again, that's another one that I have a full spoiler-free review for. You guessed it. So now let's jump straight into the actual top 10 list. In 10th place, we have A King's Radiance by Mr. Luke Schulz, who publishes under the name L.R. Schulz. This is a debut fantasy novel, start of a new series. It feels almost like if you took some of the elements of like Mistborn with the fighting against the evil empire and merged them kind of with like Avatar The Last Airbender style fighting. In this world, the magic users can absorb sunlight in through their skin, and then they can save that up as this thing called shine that they can then shoot out of their hands like little sun lasers. They can throw globs of like sun molten fire. They can enchant their weapons, make them almost like sun lightsabers. And so it's just a very action-packed rebelling against the empire type vibe. And it's just a really fun time. So if you haven't heard about it or haven't checked it out yet, you should definitely read the synopsis and think about checking it out because it's friggin' fun. Then in number 9 place is Rise of the Mages by Scott Drakeford. I have a whole bunch of debut novels this year, so you go, debut author. So this is, again, a start to a new series by Mr. Scott Drakeford. Like the prologue and the very end of this book show that there may be a gods among us, which is one of my favorite tropes of all time. There is like a magic school setting. There is that strong family situation because eventually their like school gets taken over by this outside force, and so one of the brothers manages to flee, and so a lot of it is him trying to get back and rescue his brother from being basically imprisoned by that new regime that's taken over the school. And fast-paced, action-packed, lots of fun. Then in 8th place, we're switching off of action-packed and going into the very like wholesome, in-your-feels type read, and that is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. So this book takes place in a world where there are these storms that are ravaging these coastal towns, and so every season there is a beautiful girl who's selected from their village that is chosen to be sacrificed to the sea god in the hopes of kind of calming the sea so it stops destroying their village. And so at the very start of this book, we have our main character and her brother and his fiance, and his fiance is the one who's supposed to be sacrificed to the sea god, and the sister sacrifices herself to the sea dragon who comes up to take the bride to the sea god. She sacrifices herself in her brother's fiance's place and gets whisked away to this whimsical spirit realm beneath the ocean. So it feels very Miyazaki's Spirited Away. It feels very much like those vibes, but there's also these elements of like Korean folklore because it is based on like a Korean legend or myth. And so it's just so good. It's definitely very like whimsical. There is a romance element that comes a little bit more to the forefront in like the latter half of the book, but I would not say that it's like a romance by any means. So if you're looking for kind of that like Miyazaki Spirited Away feel in book form, you're welcome. Then number 7 was part of the buddy read that took over my life for a couple months with Jashana and Ingrid, and that was the Throne of Glass buddy read. And in particular, in that buddy read we read, this is I think book 5, Empire of Storms. And this was by far my favorite book in the Throne of Glass. And one, that's because Kale is not present, and Kale is a jerk face, and we do not stand Kale and his perpetuation of this cyclical bad behavior of abusing his friends and people who care about him on all of that. So he's gone. And this book is just, we hit the ground running from the very beginning. I find that especially with Sarah J. Maas, I get a little bit, the first like third to half of her book sometimes moves very slowly and tends to be focused on like the romantical shenanigans. And that's just like, I do not come to her for the romance. I don't think she does romance particularly well, at least not for my tastes. And so this book starts with a bang, ends with a bang, fantastic. Then in sixth place, we have The Bladed Faith by the one, the only David Dalglish. This is the start to a new fantasy series. This is, again, that kind of rebelling against the evil empire trope. So this is a book where usually when I'm starting a new epic fantasy series, I kind of expect the first majority of book one to be a lot of world building, a lot of slow. This book hits the ground running. There are literally these two gods that kind of are the patron gods of this island nation, and they are fighting against this invading force. And the invading force kills their gods and implants this new, like, almost god ruler type person as the new religion as they try to wipe out the old religion of these people. And it's so good. If you love the rising against the evil empire, this is kind of that trope done at its finest. And with the gods on the page, like the intro battle sequences almost felt like boss battles from Elden Ring. Like, it is friggin' so good. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It is just, and there's a sapphic romance on page, and there is gay characters. It's just, the representation is there, the action is there, the gods are there. It's just so good. Okay, so we're halfway through this list. So in fifth place, we have The Final Strife by Miss Saara El-Arifi. I'm finding that apparently this is the year of me reading books with people rebelling against evil empires. Because, again, similar vibes. In this world, people are no longer oppressed for sexual orientation or race or anything like that. What they're oppressed for is the color of their blood. On the top of the pile is the Embers, who can do blood rune magic. Below them are the people with blue blood, and at the very bottom are the people with clear blood, known as the Ghostings, who are basically this like slave population. And at some point in the past, the slave population tried to rise up to overthrow the Embers, and so now horrible things are done to these Ghostings to keep them in the position that they're at. There is a magical competition. There is a love triangle done the best that I've ever seen. There is a bisexual, I think, main character, because she has relationships with people of not just one gender. And it's just so good. So good. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Then in fourth place, we have The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. This is book 3 in the Winter Night trilogy. This is the conclusion, and it is so good. So the Winter Night trilogy is historical fantasy. It is based on real events and people in Russian history, but it mixes it with this like very adult, spooky fairy tale vibes. And book 3 in particular, we see our main character Vasya being the witch that she was born to be. Like, oh, it's so good. But I can't say too much about it because it is the conclusion to the trilogy. So book 1 is The Bear and the Nightingale, and that has all the creepy adult vibes. If you want a book to read through the winter months for seasonal readers, look no further. It is phenomenal. Cannot recommend highly enough. It's kind of hard to like nail down like a good synopsis of the plot without ruining things. Just know it's historical fantasy, fairy tale vibes, Russian folklore. I don't think I need to say anything else, do I? Then in third place, we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Talk about like a hug of a book. In The House in the Cerulean Sea, our main character works for this organization that oversees orphanages for magical children. And so at some point he gets sent to this island where the most dangerous magical children are kept to see if the conditions at which they're being kept are good for them. And it's a journey of self-discovery, of slow burn queer romance, of adorable children that I don't really want to say too much about because you just want to be kept swept up in the whimsy. So if you're looking for just all of the warm, fuzzy, middle grade-esque vibes, but it's not middle grade book at all, then House in the Cerulean Sea. Then the books 1 and 2, it depends on the day on which you catch me. So for now, I'm going to say that in second place is Age of War. This is book 3 in the Legends of the First Empire by the one, the only, Michael J. Sullivan. And this is not the first book published in this world, but is the first book chronologically, or not the first book, the first series chronologically in this world. And it follows basically an uprising and the generation of the First Empire. So when we start this book, the humans are basically like Stone Age conditions with how much they know, because they're kept kind of oppressed by the Frey, which are basically these elven-like people. And at the very start of book 1, the humans think that the Frey are these immortal godlike beings until a human kills one of the Frey. And that kind of precipitates everything from there. There are dragons, there are mystics, there are elven mages, dwarves. It's just so good. And I'm in book 4 currently, Age of Legend, and I love this series so much. I think it is quickly becoming a favorite of all time. If you have not yet checked out Age of Myth, I mean, I'm sorry for you. Because it is so good. And then finally, my number 1 book of the year so far, at least in the first half of the year, was Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. This is another self-pub book. This book, it like reminds me of all of the it gives me the nostalgia of the classic fantasy that I love, but has enough new elements that kept me guessing and intrigued. There is no romance really in this book whatsoever. There is a side romantic subplot, but really at the core of this story is this beautiful brotherhood between our main character and his best friend. In this world, the magic users are kind of thought to be evil because the main magic users that they know basically find people that can natively use magic, drain them of their essence, and then drink said essence so that they themselves can use magic. And so they have been kind of hunting down the native magic users under the guise of, we're doing it to protect you because they could tear through this veil where these demons kind of live. And so that's kind of our main starting point. It starts very classic fantasy. Young boy in fishing village gets kind of swept up into events that he never knew. He ends up becoming a dragon rider. So for those of you out there that have nostalgia for Aragon, and you want it done really well, Dragon Mage. It is so good, and it also has neuroatypical representation because the main character is on the autism spectrum, and it is done impeccably well. So good. Cannot recommend Dragon Mage highly enough. There are those classic fantasy tropes. We have kind of hints of evil Dark Lord. We have, like I said, fishing boy, all of those things, but it's just, oh my God, it's so good. And I need more people to read it. And so with that wraps up kind of the list of my 10-ish favorite books that I've read so far in 2022. Let me know some of your favorites that you've read so far this year in the comments down below. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi plus Kit Kat. And other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!